May I take your order, sir?
During its prime time of the 40s and 50s, lobotomies were performed over 40,000 between 40,000 and 50,000 times. But due to the invention of the medication Thorazine, which is simpler and without the use of a doctor needed, the decline of lobotomies happened during the 50s. Dr. Freeman and James Watts were developers of lobotomy, and they developed the standard procedure for lobotomy. Dr. Freeman also developed the transorbital lobotomy, which is the simpler ice pick method where you basically shove an ice pick into someone's brain.
Depicted in this cross-section of the brain is the prefrontal and frontal cortex, the thalamus, and the nerve fibers protecting them. Together, they are the key components to the basic surgical procedure of leucotomy and lobotomy. The prefrontal cortex is a neural tissue which surrounds the brain. It is responsible for complex cognitive behaviors, personality expression, decision-making, moderating correct social behavior, memory, to a small extent, and the regulation of emotions, thoughts, and actions. The thalamus sends sensory information, motor signals, and spatial sense to the cortex, and obviously the nerve fibers between them allow the thalamus to send this information to the prefrontal cortex. Now, in the surgical procedure of lobotomy and leucotomy, what the surgeon or whoever is performing it does is they cut the fibers connecting these two. The results can be easily deduced.
Leucotomy was the forerunner to lobotomy. This process was much longer, harder, and messier than lobotomy because patients might end up staying a few days, whereas in lobotomy they might only be a few minutes. In leucotomy, there were 2 holes drilled in the skull called trepanning, and a leucotome, leuko meaning white matter, referring to a part of the brain, and tome meaning knife in Greek, with a special wire knife that was inserted through these holes and used to cut the fibers. Transorbital lobotomy, a procedure that was perfected by Dr. Walter Freeman in the late 1940s. In the first step, the patient was knocked out with the EST, just enough for a few minutes. Then, an ice pick was inserted up under the eyelid and with the tap of a hammer would break through the skin, subcutaneous tissue, bone, and meninges, which protect the brain. Then, the ice pick would be swung around while it was inside the brain to cut the nerve fibers, and it was removed. A few minutes later, when the patient regained consciousness, they could leave, with no side effects except for black eyes and, of course, whatever had happened inside their brain.
In the 1940s, the procedure of lobotomy was completely overused. Commercialized and publicized by Dr. Walter Freeman, there were too many cases in which the surgery was not needed or the patient had no mental illness to begin with. A nurse describes, upon watching a doctor perform lobotomies, a long line outside the waiting room door.
Ultimately, lobotomy was the fast food of the medical field. It was fast, easy, and not necessarily good, at least only for the patient.
Don't go walking down Lover's Lane with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. No, no, no.
When Dr. Antonio Ugas Moniz developed leucotomy in 1936, he concluded from his experiments that it should only be used in highly desperate cases when nothing else was available. Interestingly enough, this advice was never taken until now. Nowadays, lobotomy is no longer really used except for in extremely desperate cases. The information provided here came from an article, Contemporary Psychosurgery, from March 1999 in the Journal of Clinical Neuroscience.
The passiveness used to describe patients of lobotomy comes from a basic loss of emotional response to the environment.
Thank you. Thank you.